Hi guys, welcome to Syncromystic episode 9. Tonight, Richard and I are going to delve deep into this story that we've just recently seen here about the return of the dire wolf. This is an interesting topic to cover, and certainly I've seen other people talking about this because of the ramifications of this type of genetic engineering and bringing back extinct species. But what I haven't seen is anybody talking about the messaging that's going on in the synchromystic data field. And that's what Richard and I are going to look at here tonight. Richard Willett, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, thank you. Lovely to see you. And this show is something that other people don't cover, as you say, the metadata of this. And this was fascinating when you sent me the article of this. And at first look at it has a genetics part to it, obviously, and that's where most people stop. But the understanding of the ideology, the mythology behind it, the biblical references behind it, and this whole kind of East West versus West situation that we're looking at right now quite clearly, and Rome's involved. But these two wolves and what it symbolizes is what everybody else is missing, and this is what you've found. And it even has connections back to Jeffrey Epstein and the scientists he was working with. All of this stuff is playing out these biblical narratives, regardless if you think they're prophecies or narratives. It doesn't matter to these guys, and that's what really matters. This is a fascinating story about these two wolves that are brothers, and it has echoes of Cain and Abel, Jacob and Esau as well, doesn't it? It's the brother slaying brother. This is, and even the Virgin Mother as well. That's all in there as well.
Right? All those archetypes are pulled into this. And what are we talking about? Most people have probably seen the headlines about this. Okay, this company, Colossal Biotech, there's another tell right there in the name. Colossal, this is a reference back to the Colossus, which is an idea that comes from Greek mythology, once again, which means giant. You could read between the lines and say Nephilim, fallen angelic beings, things of this nature, right there in the title of the company, in the name of the company. And if you read a little bit further into the story, yes, they supposedly re-engineered this extinct creature, but there's people arguing, no, they didn't really do that. What they did is they edited gene sequences in an existing species and they gave it these traits. So it's not really bringing back this species from extinction per se, but in all intents and purposes, essentially it kind of is. Because now we're going to have these dire wolves here on Earth again, and they are a much larger species of wolf than what we have had in the modern era. Now, this species is said to have gone extinct some 10 to 13,000 years ago or something like that, was the last time it was seen here on Earth. And you have these people now claiming they were able to engineer this and they're all excited about it. But the big part of the story that people miss, aside from the genetic engineering component, which in and of itself is a compelling and a completely interesting thing to look at, especially in terms of the esoteric, what they're missing is the names that they applied to these wolves that were born. And of course, those are Romulus and Remus. Of course, you have twins, these twin wolves that were born, these brothers from the same, I guess, what do you call it when they're born
Pack.
together? The
So it's
same,
pack, isn't it?
yeah, the same pack, the same birthing event. However you want to explore that. So these wolves, Romulus and Remus, are a direct correlation back to the original story of the myth of the founding of Rome. And we're going to look at that. And that's what this whole thing is all about. This is how these dark occultists who run things and the controllers of this world, how they encode information into stuff. And this is in the most basic format. This is delineating between the exoteric and the esoteric in a story. They do this all the time, especially in news stories. You could find it, and once you learn how to pick this stuff out and you know and you're familiar with mythological archetypes, you'll see it everywhere. But this is how they hide information. So they're giving you this story. This is the exoteric story. You have this company that re engineered this extinct species, And in the esoteric of that, you have the story of Romulus and Remus and the founding of Rome, and you have these two wolves, the twins, the twin pillars. Once again, this connection back to a lot of these different archetypal ideas being presented here. And the wolf itself is actually a symbol of Rome, if you go back and look at it, because in the myth of Romulus and Remus, this is ostensibly where they probably got the idea to name these wolves that. In that story, Romulus and Remus are actually raised by a wolf and reared by a wolf. And this has to do with the founding of Rome. And perhaps we'll take a look at that myth to add a little more context to this. But essentially, this is, in my view, an announcement about the emergence of the New World Order. Because you see, empire, in its various iterations and forms, has been existent in the past and has crumbled in the past. And this is the whole rebirth idea. Once again, this whole rising of the phoenix from the ashes idea inherent in all of these same things. So you have this extinct species of wolf now reemerging in some new form in the modern era. So this is an announcement of the rise and or the fall of the second Rome, which biblically, if you want to line this up with biblical prophecy in the book of Revelation, this could equate 1 to 1 with the notion of Babylon. And in the book of Revelation, it tells you when the judgment comes, it says, Babylon the Great has fallen, has fallen. It repeats it twice, and biblical scholars and theologians have often come to terms in agreement that when the Bible presents something in a context like that, where it repeats itself, has fallen, it means this event has happened twice. So Babylon in the past has fallen. This is a historical fact that's been recorded. Well, they have always said, in terms of eschatology and the study of these things, that because the Bible says has fallen, this infers that Babylon, or the new modern Rome empire, will rise again. A worldwide empire will rise again and will be catastrophically destroyed and will fall once again. So we have all of this encoded in the idea. And all of this just basically from a story about genetic engineering of wolves. What do you think, Richard?
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's all tucked in there, isn't it? And what's fascinating about it, when you look at the mythology of these two wolves, these two brothers, there's so much in there. So I'll just quickly go over that for the audience. So in Rome mythology, Romulus and Remus are twin brothers. So like Esau and Jacob, Abel and Cain are twin brothers whose story tells of the events that led to the founding of the city of Rome and the Roman kingdom by Romulus following his fratricide, which means killing of your brother, of Remus. The image of a she-wolf suckling the twins is in their infancy, has been a symbol of the city of Rome and the ancient Romans since at least the 3rd century BC. So this is obviously all symbolic of Rome, which is really fascinating, as well as when you look to the places that they dwelt, these brothers. You are looking at the 7 hills of Rome, and they argued over which hill to actually place this city on. And these 7 hills of Rome are replicated where? Washington DC. Clearly, Washington DC is the 7 hills of Rome. You've even got the Capitol Hill, which is Capitoline Hill. This is all replicated there. So they just, all they did is they rebadged it. They took Rome and put it in America, and Rome became where the US is, which was controlled initially by the United Kingdom. But I'm sure there's evidence of other people controlling vast amounts of that. Very much in there with the Freemasons founding the United States. So if the fall of Rome again is the second falling of Rome, would that not mean the United States and the West again? If they fell first time a long while back. And I've always argued that Rome didn't fall. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I meant that it was because it was still clearly here. So I was like, how does it fall if you've got the United States there? I mean, that place was called Rome, Maryland before it was changed to Washington, D.C. So how, and the bloke who sold it to them was called John Pope, the land sold it. So it's all considered there. So I couldn't work out. It's like, hey, you're telling me it's fallen, but I can clearly see that it hasn't. Now, what you're telling me now fits perfectly. It's giving me goosebumps that it did fall, but they relocated, built it up again, and now it's set to fall again. And now you can see it falling in terms of this East taking over and bringing down the United States and in Europe. Am I along the right lines here,
Oh, I
Wayne, of
think
what I'm
so.
saying?
I think so, Richard. You're really picking up what I'm putting down here. Yeah, essentially, the spirit of Rome or empire has just been moved. That's all. That's the only major difference here right now. They picked it up and they moved it. They transformed the outer casing of what it all looks like. In fact, when Rome initially fell, it didn't really fall, like you said. It just morphed into something else. It became the Holy Roman Empire or the Vatican. Essentially, that's what the Roman Empire became, the Vatican. It still has its reach out into the world at large, but it looks a little different now. They've kind of moved operations to other portions of the world, and we have the primary operation right now of where it comes from is split between three different areas, and we've seen this and we've talked about this. This is your notion of three different separate city states that exist outside of the bounds of nationalities elsewhere or national boundaries elsewhere. You have Washington, D.C., you have the city of London, and you have the Vatican. And
Mm.
from this trifecta of positions of power, that is where they oftentimes will emanate their different policies from through various think tank organizations and philanthropic groups and things like that. But make no doubt about it, from these three different branches that we have the financial, the religious, and the military branches thereof in these three different independent city states having say into how things go. Behind the scenes, behind all of that, it's these same esoteric groups that run things from behind the scenes. It's always these various topmost levels of these secret society groups controlled by powerful family bloodlines, and they're obsessed with this. And sometimes at the topmost levels within this structure, they argue and they fight and they bicker about who gets to call the shots and who's really the one with the divine right to rule. And all of this traces back to family bloodlines. So it's the same thing once again, and that's why they hearken to these same archetypes, the brothers, and the one brother kills the other brother. So you have Romulus, you have Remus, you have Cain and Abel, you have that distinction between Esau and Jacob. We have all of these archetypes ever present throughout all of this, and these two different factions are constantly vying for control at the topmost levels. Although they're working towards the same ends and they belong to some of the same inner organizations, the exterior of that sometimes looks like conflict. And it looks like what we see going on in the world today. Now, it seems to me what has happened here in recent months is the faction that was controlling things for the past, say, 4 to 6 years or so, they stepped aside and let the other faction step up and take control. And now we're seeing some blowback for that because they approach things from a different point of view or a different perspective. So now we're getting that blowback from this, and we see infighting at the topmost levels in the power structure of this world, expressing itself in real world events. Therefore, we have all the things going on in Israel that are going on in Israel and in Russia and the Ukraine and everywhere else around the world. The world's a giant powder keg right now. Let's face it. Let's be honest about it. We see all of this stuff coming to fruition, but what is this in all actuality? This is the birth pangs of the new world order, the new Rome, or the foundations, the ashes of the new Rome as it crumbles. Mystery Babylon, Babylon the Great has fallen, has fallen. So is Rome, aka the United States, falling right now? The second Rome, is it falling? Is it in a free fall into the ash bin of history, and they're going to try to use this situation to have this rebirth or reemergence into of this new world order from the ashes of that, the rising of the phoenix from the ashes once again. You could read a lot into the symbolism involved here. Or is this the emergence of the new Rome, which will later fall? You see, it's all there in the esoteric if you know how to read between the lines. And I find it interesting that they'll use a science story to do all of this. And we have this connection, this harkening back once again to that Roman mythology, as we talked about, with the dire wolf. Are they telling us we're in for dire times? Even just the language that they use for this stuff to explain these things. Yes, the dire wolf is a species that did exist at one time. They have records of it, and they know some things about it, and they have now ostensibly re-engineered the dire wolf into existence, this extinct species. But why would they choose the dire wolf when they have various other animals that might be better contenders for trying to bring back to life? And this company, I guess, has plans to bring back the Tasmanian tiger and woolly mammoths and all kinds of other things that they've been talking about. But they chose the wolf first. Interesting how all these things always play together. And wouldn't you know it, this pack of wolves that was born, these two wolf cubs, well, they're named Romulus and Remus. They're brothers. They're both male wolves. And I would not be surprised in future months if the news story comes out, oh, hey, you remember those wolves, those dire wolves that we engineered? Well, the one killed the other. Uh,
Mm.
I would not be surprised if that emerges in the news cycle at some time in the future. Okay, but there's another interesting piece to this puzzle as well. If you read further into the news article, and by the way, this is a Time magazine news article that came out mainstream about this. So this is big time. Okay, let's put it that way. Time magazine is one of the major conduits that these people use for communicating hidden communications or hidden ideas with one another. So they printed this in Time magazine. Well, it turns out that a couple months later, these two wolves, they engineered another one, a sister, and her name is Khaleesi. And if you
Hmm.
go ahead and you research where does the name Khaleesi come from, well, this comes from a little HBO series named Game of Thrones. So what are they doing here? They're trying to craft a new fiction into our reality. They're attaching a fantasy based system into our reality. You see, they're trying to make something wholly synthetic. That's what this represents. Now, the story of Romulus and Remus and the whole foundation of Rome in mythology, these represent natural archetypes. This Khaleesi represents an unnatural or synthetic archetype. It's about this replacement idea, as always, the replacing the natural order with a synthetic order in the world. So this new world order idea. So this is where this all directly ports over from. So there's connections to the ideas of wolves in that story. I've never watched it or read the books, but I do have a basic understanding of some of the mythical archetypes that it leverages on. And of course, it does leverage the wolf, and this Khaleesi, I think, is said to be the dragon queen.
Right.
So there's another connection right there. So this is a lot of information, Richard. I want to hear what your thoughts are as we're just kind of spitballing this information out there.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me straight away when you're talking about a synthetic version is that, and you said at the start, these are not really a clone. They've used other species of wolf to try and re-engineer this, and engineer this with a different genome. So you're looking at an almost, it could be seen as a transhuman version or synthetic version or a version 2.0 of the dire wolf. It's not the original dire wolf. So you've got that element in there. You're looking at a synthetic version of it, a bad copy, a copy. So there's that element straight away, as you say. So they're ticking all the boxes for this esoteric stuff, this transhumanist agenda of that we're going to make something, we're going to become gods, and not only are we going to become gods, we're going to improve upon God's work, and we've created something that's not what he created, but with his, or with the God's system, we've created something better. We put the Lego bricks in a different order and we have a more beautiful castle. That's what they're saying. They're playing God, obviously. Then we have this thing about the Babylon situation falling twice, which is fascinating to me, and that's new to me. It falling twice, because that would make total sense. But what you said there earlier as well, really interesting, brings up more questions than it answers half the time. Because is Rome about to fall, or are they building up Rome again to fall again? So I know from my research, they've got about 200 years to get this job done in terms of the messianic guys I'd look at. They're definitely playing a huge role in what's going on now. They're surrounded. Well, Trump. obviously is controlled by them. Netanyahu has pledged his whole life to them, and Putin was raised by these guys. So there's that whole messianic agenda. He's definitely a massive driving force in this. But I would say they're taking away from the West. So they would see themselves as the Jacob, who changed his name to Israel. You would see themselves as Seth, the latter brother of Abel, that bloodline, and we would be the bloodline of Cain. And that gets mixed up in later on of who's who and what's what. I mean, well, we don't even have to believe any of this stuff. They believe it. But the fact is that they're all twisted up in their own heads, and half of them don't know which side they're on because they're on the black or the white. They haven't got a clue really what they are. I do always think Michael Jackson's song, doesn't matter if you're black or white, was because he was a Kabbalist. He knew he had sevens all over the Dangerous album. He knew he was speaking in code to you guys then without you guys knowing, and he was saying it's all the same. So it's fascinating because they're dropping all of these signs. It's speeding up clearly and quickly. But where are we in the timeline? That's the real question for me. Is where are we? Are we at the end of the fall of Rome? I would say that that's probably what's happening. The second fall of Rome. I didn't even know that until you said that today. Anyway, so that makes total sense to me. That would answer a lot of questions I had about Rome not falling anyway, because it's still clearly around. And that taking over, you can see Israel. So you were talking about Chabad and these guys, these messianic guys, Jewish sect have clearly infiltrated the US government. They own the US government. That's clear as day. The UK government as well. Something else was really, really interesting to add to the pile of this this mystery is King Charles sent a letter through Keir Starmer, Trilateral Commission, is clearly on the whole kind of Club of Rome board. So, but to give to Trump, and obviously that happened in front of camera. That was supposed to happen in front of camera. Christopher John Bjertnæs talks about having a biblical reference. I think it's Herod, but I can't quite remember what the actual significance of handing that letter over with. But he invited him to a meeting with the king. Now, to me, you got to decide which side you're going to fall on. I would say it is, but I'm just guessing there.
There's so much to that, Richard. That's an entirely different show. But I'll just say this about this. I've done some work on this. You remember that painting of King Charles that came out
The
last
red
year?
one, yeah.
The Red King. Well, he is the Red King, and this is an important idea in alchemy. So I'll just say this. This is all for the public display here. The Red King plus the Golden Age equals the Orange Man. And you could connect the dots all day long with that simple expression because that's what it's all about. They want to hearken in this new golden age, this new world order, through the amalgamation of this Red King with the golden age, through the prospect of the Orange Man, that is their vehicle to get it done. And this has to do with the alchemical processes. And there's a missing component in the modern acceptance of alchemy in the occult schools that plays a huge factor into this. And there's so much more to discuss about all of this, but I've actually done a show about this. I made it free because it's that important. And I actually put this out in book form too, in a transcript out there in analog form for people because I think it's that important. And I got a lot of blowback for trying to actually put that out there because I had put the picture of the king on the cover and they didn't like that. So they wouldn't let me go ahead and publish that book. I had to change the manuscript and the cover art and everything else no fewer than 6 times before
Wow.
I was able to actually publish it. And there's no pictures in it. There's no pictures in it because it would not let me put pictures in it. And I had pictures to go along with the things I talked about, primarily that portrait of the king and the importance of some of that. And there was also a picture of Queen Elizabeth being initiated into the Druidic rites by the Grand Druid. And
Yep.
so I couldn't put that in there either, because if you didn't know it, Queen Elizabeth was the White Queen. And this is another important concept in alchemy, the White Queen, followed by the Red King, and then the missing component I was talking about, which equates to this golden age and the advent of the Orange Man. So all of these things are inherent in alchemy And they're also an important concept in something called primal witchcraft.
Hmm.
And I did an entire episode on this called The Red King Alchemy and Witchcraft. And it's also available in the form of a transcript in book form in an analog version if people are interested in that.
That's absolutely that's fascinating, and I need to read that book as well. I've just looked at the Orange Man. Obviously, when we say Orange Man, with everyone goes Donald Trump. That's been put out there on purpose. I didn't know this though. Orange Man refers to a member of a secret society organised in the north of Ireland in 1795 to defend the British sovereign and to support the Protestant religion.
And they're also the Syracuse Orange Men are the name of the college team here in the U.S. in Syracuse University. The Syracuse Orange Men. There's more to the idea of the Orange Man than what people have led on. And yes, they've attached that moniker to Trump because of his hair. And many have explored this avenue of thought with it in saying that the word orange translates in numerology to the number 33. And there's something to that as well. So we have this notion of the Orange Man, but this is the important aspect of it. It's all part of an alchemical process. Now,
Mm.
in some of the recorded vantage points of alchemy that we see in the literature, a lot's been disregarded in the modern era of alchemy as far as the procedures go. There's a missing step that they don't really put a lot of emphasis on in modern forms of spagyria, which is the alchemical process behind developing tinctures and stuff like that from plant-based materials. They don't put emphasis on it, but it's a yellowing process
Yep.
that is part of it. They primarily talk about the negrito and the albedo and the rubedo in modern forms of alchemy and spagyria. And this is the blackening, the white color, and the reddening. But they've left out a part that was explored early in the days of alchemy before the times of our modern understanding of it have come about. And it's after the time of Paracelsus when this fourth part of the process, the yellowing process, I think it's citronization, I think is the name they apply to it. There's a couple different terms that have been used, but a lot of this has been lost by the modern occult in these things. This is stuff you're not going to hear anywhere else, guys.
Mm.
There's nobody else talking about this. Okay, just here, me and Richard. That's it. Nobody else is going to tell you about how they invoke these alchemical ideas into the transformation or transmutation of the human consciousness to accept certain things in this reality. And this is what a lot of this plays on. So, this is another important facet of things that kind of only got a little bit of a side note by most people, that Trump and the king have this arrangement that they were supposed to meet in secret or something to talk about things. And maybe it is, hey, what team are you going to be on? What are we doing here? Maybe it does have something to do with that, but it's also the messaging of the alchemical process going on. And it has everything to do with this emergence of the New World Order from the ashes, the phoenix rising from the ashes. Once again, the symbology is always there, it's always present. And now you're attaching the ideas of Rome to Trump once again. And we talked about this. We talked about the idea of the new Caesar. And all of these archetypes have aligned in this way. And now you have this story about genetic engineering. Well, this is also a form of revelation of the method because they do fully intend to transform human beings in this way. And have they already done so? Well, some would say yes. And are they working on this? This has everything to do with the advent of the transhumanist movement in an attachment to this New World Order philosophy that they're putting out there, this new golden age, this re-arisal or the fall of Rome, however you want to view it. And there's different ways we could look at this. And I don't have all the pieces and I don't have all the answers, but I'm just telling you what I do know and what I do see out there in the synchromystic field, because we could take all of this information and we could know a couple more things. And like I said, I think it's important we talk about this with the story about the wolves because nobody else is covering it. Nobody else picked up on that. They're
Hmm.
all talking about the aspects of genetic engineering and how this could be a dangerous thing. And yes, they're most certainly correct, but that's the subtext. That's the exoteric in this story. You're totally missing the esoteric points if that's all you're focusing on. And that's what we're here for, isn't it, Richard? We want to point these things out and help people to think in a different way, think outside the box, and have a better understanding intuitively of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. That's the level above it. That's the broth along the top. That's the bubbling, and you are going to get. That is important to look into that stuff, and we will cover that today. There's some Jeffrey Epstein connections here. What I wanted to just point out, and I was trying to find when you were talking about straight away this week, I've started a documentary on immortality, and one of the things I was looking into was in alchemy the magnus opus, or the great work. So that would be the great work of the Freemasons, and the colours that they go through are this kind of process are black, white, yellow, and kind of like a purpling red colour, which one sounds like the flag of it, Germany to me. So I do wonder if that was used as an alchemical process in World War II to get to the next part. But it's so fascinating. The Philosopher's Stone is also connected to, so black, white, yellow, red. Sorry, black, white, yellow, red is the great work magnum opus, and that's the that it goes through these kind of colors. They work with all of these techniques, and more you look into it, you're like, oh my god, this is, I can see this everywhere. So the yellow would be more gold, of a gold color, so black, white, red, yellow, and sort of they do sort of say like a gold color. That red is more ruby red, but they're the kind of main colors that go through it in an alchemical process, um when it's turning one thing to another, which is that they understand the nature of reality, so they understand the nature of these things. That's what it's all based on, alchemy and Plato, and they were talking about the same process over and over again, just different ways of saying it. These stories that we're looking at, and I would say even the biblical stories, are an alchemical process to bring about a change in how our reality, how we live. It's all a process. They understand what steps need to go, the story of the process, and they understand that. So a lot of this I learned from Wayne's work, and especially him pointing me in that direction to think like this, and you see it. And there's the Kabbalah stuff, and that's one aspect of it. But then there's this alchemical stuff, which the Kabbalah stuff was based upon anyway. And then you realize that they're all talking this very similar language, and as you say, you start to see it everywhere. One of the people, so at the top level, the broth level, the top, you can see, and it sounds deep because it is fairly deep, but the George Church is someone who's popped up here, who's part of this company that we were talking about. This I forgot the name of the company now because it's
Colossal
one of my
biotech. Is
Colossal
it?
Biotin. That's it.
Yeah,
He's one of the founders of this company. Now George Church has openly admitted to meeting with Jeffrey Epstein many times, and even being funded by Epstein after he was convicted in 2008 of being a child trafficker and child abuser. He's apologized for it. If you look at the man, if I had to draw someone that was a baddie in a science fiction movie but looked kind of nice and you could probably trust him, he was the good cop to Klaus Schwab's bad cop, I would draw this man. He's got a beautiful head of white hair, piercing blue eyes. He looks like he's been genetically engineered to look like some sort of character. He looks like the character in the Matrix who plays the Kronos character, who plays the Yoda Bayoff character, the main guy. It does
so
all come out the same way.
let
They
me
all look.
before you continue, let me get this straight. So a guy named Church is
Mm,
heavily involved with science.
yep, exactly.
Can you see
Bizarre.
the drop there again?
Yep. And I don't think these are the real names. I really don't. And I've said the same about Spielberg, which means big lie, and George Lucas, which means light. I don't think these are their real names. I think they were born into to intelligence and given character names. This is their Mossad type front office character they play, and one of probably many. Some of them get famous doing it. That character becomes famous. So when you see these characters die, are the real people dying behind it, or is the character being put to rest in the story narrative? Very interesting. But yep, George Church, massive part of this colossal company, isn't he?
That's what my understanding is. So yeah, we have all of these connections, and of course, we know the things Epstein was doing. Okay, and there's some of this that has come out in the mainstream press, and most people associate that with human trafficking and child trafficking and all of these debaucherous sexual things that were being done by Epstein and his buddies on Epstein Island. But what they don't talk about too much is the angle of the genetic engineering and all of the things that Epstein was very much into. You see, he wanted to develop a new type of man in terms of things. He wanted to engineer a new type of man, a new class of man, the Ubermensch of Nazi thought, the Superman, the Overman, all of these same ideas that tie directly to transhumanism. You see, it's always the same things with these people. It's all about these sexual magical workings to bring this about, combined with the technological aspect. That's what they're trying to bring into fruition here in the modern era. So it's all about building this new world order, and it's going to be a transhumanist world order or a post-human world order. That's what they're trying to bring about. And of course, they'll angle this every possible way they can to where it sounds good and it looks attractive to people. But most certainly, when you realize that the benefits of some of these new technologies and some of these new ideologies are not intended for those of us that they consider to be the profane, and that's anybody that's not in the big club, then you begin to understand the devious nature behind it. It's not intended for you and me. We're not going to be the beneficiaries. In fact, this is what transhumanism is, and this comes from the mouths of pro-transhumanists. They call transhumanism, quote unquote, eugenics without coercion. So the whole idea is the great culling in disguise, if you want to get down to it. So they're going to offer us some of these new technologies. Oh, we could cure cancer. We could use AI Stargate program to detect cancer early within you, years before you get it, and develop a specific tailor-made treatment specifically for you that alters your DNA, and we'll give that to you, and then you won't get cancer years down the road. So you go to the doctor, you don't have cancer, they do a blood test and tell you, well, 10 years from now you develop cancer. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an artificial intelligence to tinker with your genome, and we're going to tinker with your genome, and then you won't get cancer in 10 years. And then boom, you turn up dead in 1 year. So you didn't get cancer, but that's what they're going to do, and that's the
Mm.
whole rollout of this, and that's how they'll try to make it sound attractive. They're going to prevent these diseases in the future by tinkering with your genome. This has transhumanism written all over it, and these are the kind of things they're experimenting with, and this is what these family bloodlines are obsessed with. It's not about necessarily just developing like the nuts and bolts mechanical technologies like computers and stuff like that. They're tinkering with biology because that's all a very intricate part of all of it. They're trying to merge man with machine in every possible way. And they're doing this by essentially hacking the natural systems that we have, trying to tinker with your DNA and do that kind of stuff as well. And they've developed some of these technologies and rolled them out in a massive test. And of course, we'll know this as the COVID pandemic, right? But certainly we understand some of this is going on. And we're only in the early phases of it in the public view, anyway. But they have a lot of things planned, and they're going to go about trying to roll them out in various ways, but it always comes back to these occult angles of things. At the end of the day, it's all about this occult ideology behind all of it that is the important part. Because otherwise, people will look and say, well, they wouldn't do that. Well, you wouldn't do that, but they most certainly would. They are psychopaths and they have a different belief system than you and I. That's the important thing. So even if you think all this stuff is woo woo nonsense, be advised there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these things, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs affect all of us. So you better understand it, and you better watch and see what's going on with it and know what they're doing. And that's what we're out here trying to sound the alarm about.
One of the groups that's contributing to this that I've been researching lately, and I don't know if you heard of these, they're called Alcor, and they deal with cryogenics. Now, obviously, that's very much involved with what Scientology was doing. Scientology, their Church of Spiritual Technology, isn't far from Zorro Ranch. In my opinion, from all the research I've done, they're all connected under New Mexico. And people that have been abused by Epstein tell you that the trafficking wasn't going on really. You can't find the people that the victims that have been trafficked. Actually, he was using them for his own sexual gratification, and they were being experimented on. Now, this is Alcor, so this is a company that deal with cryogenics, and there's a person that funds these guys that's very, very dodgy indeed. So this is what they say. What is death? This is from their website. And listen to the terminology. Our understanding of death continues to evolve. The definitions of death change over time as medical understanding and technologies improve. I don't think they do, but there you go. Someone who had been declared dead decades ago may still have a chance today. Yes, because they hadn't died yet. Death used to be when a person's heart stopped. That's when their heart couldn't be restarted, and it's now been extended further. They start off with something that's obvious that you would agree with. Of course, you would. Um, then they get into this. They've got a term for it. The most accurate definition of death. Death is only permanent when the structures encoding memory and personality necessary for consciousness, they mean your hard drive, have become so disrupted, corrupted, like a hard drive can become, that it becomes theoretically impossible to recover the person. They're saying that you are information on a hard drive and you're only dead when your hard drive is corrupt, so they can't get hold of that information. But what if they could bring that information back? Obviously, is the question they're putting out there. So they said this is called information theoretical death. Any other definition of death is arbitrary and subject to revision. Theoretical, information theoretical death is what they call it. That's you are a computer program, you are a bit of information controlling but just facilitating a body, and as soon as that information can no longer be gotten at, you are the information. That's your consciousness, bits and bobs, eyes and O's. And once that can't be retrieved, as in wiping a computer hard drive, if they can't get at it, then you're dead. This is what they're putting out there. Now, there was someone involved with this who's basically, and I forgot his name now. I'm gonna have to get him up. And I only found out about this yesterday because I'm doing this research for this immortality documentary. And this guy, he's got Parkinson's now, apparently. But you'll have to question that considering what they're all into. And he funds these guys. It's called Alcor. So go and have a look at Alcor. And one of the guys that funds it is in a bit of trouble, but you can see why, because this is what they're doing. They're setting everyone up to be part of this, and that's how their mind works. So I just need to find this guy Alcor. So what is his name? I can't find him at the moment. He's basically in a lot of trouble for abusing over 100 men, women, and children sexually, and they can't trial him because he's about to basically, they said, pass. And this was last November, pass because he's of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, one of the two. And what they're saying is that here you go. Oh no, that's not the one. I'll just speak about it. He talks about the courts have said if they are, because he's involved with this Alcor and cryogenics, if they can bring him back in the future, he will still be tried for his crimes. So they're even suggesting that it's the same person they're bringing back. It's mad, isn't it?
It is, and there's an old term for this. It's called necromancy, in case you
Yeah.
didn't know. And there's look, there's so much more to this, and this always ties back to the occult. Always, this whole notion. What did they call this? They said when you die, what do they call it that they could possibly retrieve it? It's when your hard
It's
drive.
basically, yeah,
What was it?
information.
Yeah,
Can't
that's the
remember
one.
off the top of my head.
Information. What was that term again? Because I want
Let
to
me
touch.
find it. Yeah, because this is really important. I touched upon this in the video. Is that this was really important to see how they word these things. Go and have a look at Alcor's website. So it's Alcor, and you'll find it there. But it's really, really important. So let me just find that Alcor. Robert Miller was this guy's name.
Okay,
Sorry,
there
just
you
bear with me. Robert Miller was his guy's name. Cryogenic supporter accused of sex abuse could be sued if he's brought back to life. Insane. And they've dubbed him. Guess what they've dubbed him, Wayne?
what?
Canada's Jeffrey Epstein.
There you go. It
Yeah,
never ends. Never
yeah,
ends, does it?
it's
So
insane. Yeah, it never ends. So let me just find that terminology. I've got memory like a sieve sometimes. I can't remember things
yeah, me
seconds
too.
after I've said them. Here we go. I'll find
That's
it
the
now.
nature of our work, though, Richard. When we experience and encounter so much information on a daily basis,
Oh, exactly.
sometimes it
Yeah.
slips through the cracks.
So
So,
it's called information theoretic death. That's what they call it.
Okay, information theoretic death. So essentially, what they're saying is if the information field is preserved somehow of this human being's personality, they could retrieve it, perhaps somehow, and access it. There's
Mm-hmm.
an old occult term for this. They call it a shade. This is what necromancers have done in the past, and what some that explore the magical dark arts have done. They will actually go to a recently deceased person's grave, and they will call up their shade, and their shade will give these people information that they need. Well, all they have to do is ask them questions. This is not the actual spirit or soul of the person, or the actual ontological self of the person there, but it's an image. It's kind of like a data storage in the astral or the etheric plane. It's an etheric copy of their body that retains most of their memories, and they can ask questions. And this is how a lot of divination has been done in past times. They'll call up this shade and they will ask them questions, and the shade will answer the questions because it just has all the old physical information, all the physical memories, and everything stored there. And this, I encourage people, go look this stuff up. You could find this a great book to find information about this. It's simply titled Magic by Dr. A.S. Raleigh, the official scribe of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor at one time. That's who this guy was. And he wrote this book specifically for his own personal students. And he talked about this stuff, about these different forms of magic. And if you're not the reading type, I actually have done an entire series on this book on my podcast. So you could go back and look up those episodes if you're interested in exploring that avenue of thought further. So, what they're talking about is just a new technological spin on a very old process here. So, they're not actually talking about essentially bringing somebody back to life. They're just bringing the information back so they can access this. And this is what the controllers of this world want. They don't want to lose information. They have no actual care or interest in actually bringing a real person back. But they have a vested interest in bringing back an artificial or synthetic knockoff of that person, bringing back their memories, their core memories, the information that they had encapsulated within them, and reproducing that in a synthetic form. That's what it's about. So, in essence, it's bringing back a shade into this world of shells. That's what they are trying to build, by the way. And I think we've touched upon that in the past. This world of shells, devoid of spirit. And that's what this whole transhumanist ideology is all about. But those dark occultists at the top of the power structure, they don't want to be part of this world of shells. They want to retain their individuation and retain their spirit within themselves, and they want to try to transcend and live forever in this physical material world form and have control of all the information, all of the others, without losing any of that information. But they don't care about your eternal soul, and they don't take that into consideration with any of this, because their all important idea revolves around building the shell and the illusion of the personality of the person there. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual ontological self with these people. They don't care about that. They would prefer that your soul go elsewhere, and they don't have to deal with that anymore, because that becomes a problem for them. It all has to do with the free will principle. If you are not an individuated spirit residing in this physical form, you don't have free will. So if your information's all here, but they could control that information and therefore control you. It's not really you in there. There's no spirit making free will choices in that vehicle. That's what they want. They want to be able to steer it and manipulate it however they see fit. And they have a hard time with that right now. Thus, that's why they do the things they do. They don't want to lose the information. Remember, they see you as bits of information. They don't want to lose that physical information, but they don't care about the spiritual component of it. And that's the problem we have with all of this. And just speaking on that, I know this is a different way of thinking. It's thinking outside the box and might be a bridge too far for some people, but I assure you, there's always that type of an occult underpinning to this stuff. They're just trying to reframe it as modern science, but it's always been there.
Mm. It's fascinating, isn't it? One thing I'd like to put to you as a someone who's Christian yourself, and I know you don't go much into the religious side of it, but you're Christian. What I've kind of noticed is that the Christian faith, and I mean, I know, and this I'm grouping things together because it's vast, and the Islamic faith tend to have their kind of salvation in the next life, in the afterlife, whereas the Jewish faith, especially these Talmudic Jews, have it where they want to live forever in this world. So they
Right.
don't want to pass on. They want to live forever. They want to be transhumans, but actually the transhumans would be, the robots and the slaves. They want to be immortal gods here. So you've got two things going on there. I find that really interesting. They're almost like want it all for themselves. Have they convinced people that this is a bad place to be, such as the Gnostics talk about, to escape, but they've gone, hang on, we want it for ourselves. Let's just tell them that it's shit here. It just seems to
Winner,
me,
winner, chicken dinner.
yeah,
That's all I got to say about that, Richard. I think that's the case, but that's a misnomer that Christianity is all about salvation in the afterlife. No, it goes deeper than that. Jesus said he came to give us life and life more abundantly. That we could have that today, right now. That's a common misconception about Christianity. As far as Islam, I can't speak to that. I don't have any personal experience with that. And I do know some slight details about the Islamic religion, but I have not in depth really studied Islam in that way to know an awful lot about what their ideology is. But certainly, we always get this premise from these people in control. They want to be the gods of this place. They want to stay here in this physical material world reality and be the gods of this place. And they want to try to make it as miserable for the rest of us as possible. Now, what is the reason for that? There's a couple possible reasons. This is a beautiful world. God created this world beautiful, for sure. It does have beauty. Now, it's because of the things man has done in his fallen state through his free will principle that it has become kind of corrupted in a lot of ways, but there is still a lot of beauty here. So, this ties a lot into that as well. So, it is not in the state of original perfection as it should be. So, these people are all about thinking they could perfect it themselves and reap the benefits of having that perfection brought about here. And they could be the gods of this place. And they're all about having the rest of us just animal like, being controlled like animals or cattle, human resources, if you will. So that's kind of the ideology that they have, these people at the topmost levels of the power structure. Now, there's a second side to this, an opposite side of the coin, if you will. I think that at the heart of a lot of it, these people are very fearful of having to answer to the creator for the bad things they've done in this place. And therefore, they want to do everything they can to push off that eventual advent of their death so that they have to be held accountable for those things. They don't want accountability. They want to be gods. They want to wield power and they want to have total control of everything. And they don't want to have to answer to anybody about this. And I think that is at the heart and soul of all the things they do, that fear of having to step up and be responsible for the things they've done in this life. And what have they done here? They've established ideas and philosophies and concepts like Gnosticism, where we live on this prison planet. You see all of these ideas they've developed. They want us to think negatively of the physical world when it doesn't have to be all negative. There are a lot of positive things here, but it's all about reconciliation with our Creator. They don't want that reconciliation because they want to usurp God. That's what it's about, these controllers of this place. So they're not looking for that. And the thing is, we can have that reconciliation with God, and that's the important concept here that we need to understand. But they want nothing to do with that. They want to try to engineer that out of the entire system and make this synthetic system in which they live. They want to control the entire material world, and they don't want to have to answer to a higher power for their doing of that. So, what they have firmly established here is this notion in modern philosophy and occultism that we live in this prison planet type system. And this translates in the modern day as people saying that we live in a simulation, simulation theory. All of these different ideas, the matrix, all of these ideologies permeating the human conscious mind and subconscious mind in this era, getting people to question is there really a divine spark within me? Am I really a spirit having a physical manifestation here? Or is this all that there is? And they would like us to think this physical material world is all that there is, and there's nothing beyond that. And that is part and parcel of the whole concept of this transhumanist push. And even things like that Al Core talking about information, you're just information. And if your information gets corrupted, that's the only way you could really die. Well, they're putting a new modern spin on a lot of these old ideas. So it's all about this separation from God, this separation from spirit, and the building of this world of shells, of which they want to be the gods of, and they want to have immortality here and control here. So you have this division in the power structure at the topmost levels here, because I do think there may be some people in those circles that may be concerned about spiritual things to a certain degree, but they're not as organized as the bad side of it. Let's put it that way.
I would suggest that they're all concerned about spiritual things because they're terrified. Because so they can only be terrified of something that they believe to exist. So if they don't believe in spiritual things, they wouldn't be scared of it. They'd just say, well, we die. And wherever we go next, see what happens. But the fact is they're terrified of it. They must believe in it. It doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
So yeah, they
It
have to
really
believe
is.
in it.
It really is a dilemma, isn't it? I mean,
Mm.
because they are terrified of that, but yet they deny it publicly. And that's a lot of the problem. It's this double speak that goes on. It's that whole uh, juxtaposition of positions with this that's the confusing part, because they will espouse on the surface their disbelief in any such thing, but at the end of the day, that's exactly what motivates them, is this fear of death and this fear of having to answer to a higher power, and they don't want to necessarily admit that to themselves, let alone to the public at large. That's wherein a lot of these things really truly lie. It
Yeah.
all has to do with these philosophical questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where are we going? All these things we struggle with as human beings that we don't really have an answer to. And that's the beauty of the mystery. And that's why mystery has been a concept adopted by all of these esotericists and things like that. It used to be a religious ideal, the study of mystery. And that's another topic for another day. We could get into what the essence is of mystery in religion and this kind of thing at some other date here in the future, because all of these ideologies are where our modern interpretations and technological applications of these things come from, and that's something that people haven't really explored.
Yeah, and we're no further, we're no closer to figuring out the answer to any of these than we were 8,000 years ago. But we've killed a lot of people in the process of trying to figure it out. It's these unanswerable questions, and that's what it is. And you said that, as I say, like the documentary I'm making asks that question. They're terrified of it. They're clearly, what are they terrified of, and why? And this, obviously they're terrified of death. They call it Kronos. They call it Saturn. They call it Father Time. Obviously, the Matrix God is Yaldabaoth, who's obviously Kronos, and Saturn, the same Father Christmas. Satan, the bearded white guy with the white beard and the white hair, George Church, is the same thing. So quite clearly, they're playing out these roles. They're terrified of that, but they but an I suppose a sane mind, well, like I know, but like a sane mind would say the worst hell on earth would be to live in fear forever, because you can't guarantee forever, because you're not tomorrow. So you could say, I've lived 3,000 years, I'll live in forever. You don't know. You've just lived 3,000 years. You might die at 3,001 days. You are constantly resigning yourself to live in fear forever. So that's not an existence. That's hell on earth. Is it not?
I would think so. And in essence, this is something that I really speculated about actually way back in the writing of my first book, and I put it in there. Are these people, in fact, through the advent of this transhumanist notion of things, building their own personal hell? Is existing in the digital domain, uploading your consciousness to the machine to live forever, is that actually a type of building your own hell? Think about it. That's something that seems like a likely prospect to me.
So do you
There,
think, Wayne, Dwayne, it's a case of we're going to hell, we might as well control it and design it ourselves? That's what I think.
it might be
Mm.
something to that regard, but essentially, at the end of the day, there's only going to be one consciousness controlling the entire system. And that's going to be an AI utility, probably merged with the first fruits of the transhumanist movement here in a spiritual sense. And I could almost readily assure you that whatever that intelligence is that emerges at the end that pulls off this transhumanist thing where they upload all of the people's collective consciousness and memory and everything into the computing cloud to live forever, this being that's left, intelligence, whatever you want to call it, will invariably call itself Lucifer. I could almost assure you of that. So this is something that it requires a little bit of thinking outside the box, and it's uncomfortable for some people to really explore these ways of thinking. But essentially, this is the conclusion that I've come to ultimately in looking at all things transhumanism, because it is the fulfillment of their great work. It's a twisted and perverted, inverted version of what the original great work was intended to be. But this is what has taken hold in this world. This is what these dark powers that run things in this world are steering things for. They're looking for this ultimate fulfillment of transhumanism, the post human era, in this collective Borg type hive mind, in essence, locking all of this in as the fruition of their great work. And that's what it's all about. That's always where it seems to point when you explore these avenues of thought back to their origins and then trace it forward. And we could see they're feverishly working towards that. They want to build this new world order, and they want to use artificial intelligence to get there. But the problem with artificial intelligence is it lacks divine spark. It lacks imagination. That's a key component of the human condition. We function basically on the masculine and the feminine principles in mankind. The masculine premise being will, and the feminine premise being imagination. They lack imagination. Artificial intelligence lacks imagination. That's why they're trying feverishly to build these AI software, these chat GPTs and stuff like that, to try to reproduce creativity. Why do you think it's come to that, where AI is generating art and poetry and everything else, rather than say what I would like to use AI for: vacuum my house, wash the dishes? Like seriously, this is the future that we were promised in the old cartoons, the Jetsons and stuff like that. Where's my robot maid to clean my house? That's a more apt use for artificial intelligence, in my view, rather than having it try to replace us in doing art and producing poetry and all kinds of imaginative efforts here. But that's why they're so focused on that, because the AI lacks imagination. It lacks that basic human principle that is part of having this divine spark within us. And it can't duplicate that, which is why they're trying so hard to get AI to do those things. But at the same time, they also want to merge the machine with man himself, because we've discussed this in the past. Man is the gateway between worlds. And if they could merge those two things together, well, it creates a vehicle for the indwelling of some type of a spiritual force that doesn't belong here. And that's where they will step in. And certainly this all has to do with all of that. And I know there's a lot more ideas here to explore, but we're running low on time.
Well, it's the, as you say, it's the Stargate that they want to corrupt and then take hold of. And I suppose if life, what I suppose the message of this would be, if life is anything, it's an alchemical process. Make of it what you will. And this is this process we're in, and it's up to us. We can make of it what we will. There's many more of us than these lunatics. Wayne, where can people find your work? This has been a wonderful episode. Where can people find your work?
People could find me at my website, www.alchemicaltechrevolution.com. Where could the good people find you, Richard?
All my video work mostly on iconic.com, and you can find my Substack at Some May Conspire. Yeah, everything's there. But it's been a fantastic episode, guys. If you have any topics you'd like us to discuss or review, then do let us know in the comments. And thank you for all your support. It's growing really well. I'm really, really proud of what we're doing. There's nothing like this out there.